The early morning sun struggled to penetrate the grimy windows of Rosie's Diner, a rundown establishment on the outskirts of Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York. Inside, 24-year-old Sophia Martinez wiped down the counter, her long brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed countless sleepless nights, but a determined spark still flickered in her gaze. As she worked, Sophia's mind wandered to the events that had led her to this moment. Just 6 months ago, she had been a promising pre-med student at Columbia University, her future bright with possibilities. Now, she found herself struggling to make ends meet, working double shifts at the diner to support her ailing mother and younger sister. The bell above the door chimed, snapping Sophia out of her reverie. She plastered on a smile, ready to greet the first customer of the day. Her cheerful expression faltered as she recognized the man who sauntered in, Alexander Blackwood, the wealthiest and most influential resident of Millbrook. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the nervousness that crept up her spine. "What can I get for you today?" Alexander's cold blue eyes swept over her dismissively. "A coffee. Black. And make it quick, I don't have all day to waste in this establishment." Sophia nodded and turned to prepare his order, trying to ignore the sting of his words. As she poured the coffee, she couldn't help but remember a time when Alexander Blackwood had looked at her very differently, with warmth, admiration, and perhaps even love. 5 years ago, during her first summer break from college, Sophia had worked as an intern at Blackwood Industries. She and Alexander had grown close, their relationship blossoming into something that felt like the beginning of a grand romance. But as the summer drew to a close, Alexander had abruptly ended things, claiming that their worlds were too different. Now, as Sophia placed the steaming cup of coffee in front of him, she wondered if he even remembered those moments they had shared. "That'll be $2.50, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. Alexander pulled out a crisp $100 bill and tossed it on the counter. "Keep the change," he said with a smirk. "I'm sure you need it more than I do." Sophia's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she held her head high. "Thank you for your generosity, sir," she replied, her voice laced with barely concealed sarcasm. As Alexander took a sip of his coffee, his face contorted in disgust. "What is this swill?" he spat. "I've tasted better coffee from gas stations. Is this really the best you can do?" Sophia took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "I'm sorry if it's not to your liking, Mr. Blackwood. I'd be happy to make you another cup." "Don't bother," he sneered. "I should have known better than to expect quality from a place like this." "Tell me, Sophia, is this really what you've amounted to? Serving subpar coffee in a greasy spoon? What happened to all those grand dreams of becoming a doctor?" The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. She clenched her fists, struggling to maintain her composure. "Life doesn't always go as planned, Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly. "Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love." Alexander let out a cruel laugh. "Sacrifices? Please. You're just making excuses for your own failures. Face it, Sophia, you never had what it takes to succeed in the real world. This," he gestured around the dingy diner, "is exactly where you belong." As he continued to berate her, Sophia felt something inside her snap. Years of pent-up frustration and anger bubbled to the surface. Without thinking, she grabbed the pot of hot coffee and poured it directly into Alexander's lap. The wealthy man leapt to his feet, howling in pain and outrage. "You little bitch," he roared. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'll have you fired for this. I'll make sure you never work in this town again." Sophia stood her ground, her eyes blazing with a fire that had long been dormant. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Fire me. Ruin me. But before you do, perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone here why the great Alexander Blackwood is so threatened by a simple waitress. The diner fell silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Alexander's face paled, a flicker of fear crossing his features. "What are you talking about?" he hissed. Sophia took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm talking about the real reason you ended things between us 5 years ago. I'm talking about the secrets I uncovered during my internship at Blackwood Industries, secrets that could bring your entire empire crumbling down." Alexander's eyes widened in shock. "You're bluffing," he whispered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "Am I?" Sophia countered. "Shall we discuss the offshore accounts? The insider trading? Or perhaps the creative accounting that's been keeping your company afloat for the past decade?" The color drained from Alexander's face as he realized the precariousness of his situation. He glanced around nervously, acutely aware of the other patrons hanging on every word. "You can't prove anything," he said weakly. Sophia's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Can't I? It's amazing what a desperate college student can find when she's willing to dig deep enough. I may be just a waitress now, Mr. Blackwood, but I haven't forgotten everything I learned during that summer." She leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You broke my heart, Alexander. You made me feel worthless, like I was nothing more than a summer fling to be discarded. But I kept your secrets, even when revealing them could have saved me from all this." She gestured to her waitress uniform. "I kept them because, despite everything, I still believed there was good in you." Alexander swallowed hard, his arrogance replaced by a mixture of fear and shame. "Sophia, I didn't know. I never meant to." "Save it," Sophia cut him off. "I don't want your excuses or your pity. What I want is for you to remember this moment the next time you think about belittling someone you consider beneath you. Because you never know what secrets they might be holding." With that, Sophia turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Alexander Blackwood speechless and shaken. As she pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a reminder that she was more than just a waitress in a small-town diner. Little did Sophia know that this confrontation was just the beginning. The secrets she had uncovered were far more dangerous than she realized, and her bold stand against Alexander Blackwood had set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. As she leaned against the kitchen wall, catching her breath, Sophia's mind raced with possibilities. She thought of her mother, bedridden and in need of expensive medical treatments. She thought of her sister, Kelly, whose college dreams seemed to be slipping away with each passing day. And she thought of herself, the bright, ambitious young woman she had once been, now hidden beneath layers of exhaustion and disappointment. For a moment, Sophia allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she could reclaim her dreams, help her family, and maybe even find justice for the wrongs she had witnessed. But as quickly as the thought came, she pushed it aside. It was too dangerous, too risky. She had already taken an enormous gamble by confronting Alexander, and the consequences of that action were yet to be seen. As if on cue, the kitchen door swung open, and Marge, the diner's owner, stormed in. Her face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "Sophia Martinez," she bellowed. "What in God's name do you think you're doing out there? Do you have any idea who that man is?" Sophia straightened up, preparing herself for the inevitable. "I know exactly who he is, Marge," she said calmly. "And I know what I did." Marge's eyes narrowed. "Then you know I have no choice but to fire you." Alexander Blackwood could shut this place down with a single phone call. "I can't risk that, no matter how much of a jerk he might be." Sophia nodded, a strange sense of calm washing over her. "I understand, Marge. I'll get my things. As she gathered her meager belongings from her locker, Sophia's mind wandered to the USB drive hidden in the false bottom of her makeup bag. On it was all the evidence she had collected during her internship, proof of the Blackwood family's misdeeds that could topple an empire. For years, she had kept it as insurance, never intending to use it. But now, as she stood in the dingy back room of Rosie's diner, jobless and with nothing left to lose, Sophia began to wonder if it was time to bring the truth to light. She stepped out into the alley behind the diner, the cool morning air a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the kitchen. As she looked up at the brightening sky, Sophia made a decision. She wouldn't go down without a fight. She had sacrificed too much, endured too much, to let Alexander Blackwood and his ilk continue to prosper while good people suffered. With renewed determination, Sophia set off down the street, her mind already formulating a plan. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: her days of being a doormat were over. It was time for Sophia Martinez to reclaim her destiny. As she walked, lost in thought, she didn't notice the sleek black car that pulled out of the diner's parking lot and began to follow her at a discreet distance. Inside, Alexander Blackwood watched her intently, his expression a mixture of fear, regret, and something else, a grudging admiration for the fire he had just witnessed. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "We have a situation. The Martinez girl, she knows everything. Yes, everything. Find out what she's planning and stop her, whatever it takes. Our entire future depends on it." As Alexander ended the call, he couldn't shake the feeling that his comfortable world was about to be turned upside down. And somewhere deep inside, a part of him almost welcomed it. Meanwhile, Sophia arrived at her modest apartment, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew she was taking an enormous risk, but the thought of finally standing up to the corruption and injustice that had plagued her life filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As she opened the door, she was greeted by the sight of her younger sister, Kelly, hunched over a pile of textbooks at the kitchen table. Kelly looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Sophia? What are you doing home so early?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Sophia took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "Kelly, we need to talk. Something's happened, and, well, things are about to change. For all of us." Kelly's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Did something happen at the diner?" Sophia smiled wryly. "You could say that. I lost my job." "What?" Kelly exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "But Sophia, we need that money. How are we going to pay for Mom's treatments? My tuition?" Sophia held up a hand, silencing her sister's panicked questions. I know. It's going to be okay, Kelly. I promise. In fact, if things go the way I hope they will, we might be able to do more than just scrape by. We might actually have a chance at the life we've always dreamed of." Kelly's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Sophia, what are you talking about? What's going on?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks of involving her sister in what was sure to be a dangerous endeavor. But as she looked into Kelly's eyes, full of trust and concern, she knew she couldn't keep her in the dark. "Do you remember that internship I did at Blackwood Industries a few years ago?" Sophia asked. Kelly nodded slowly. "Yeah, the one where you met that rich guy. What was his name?" "Alexander?" "That's the one," Sophia confirmed. "Well, during that internship, I discovered some things. Dangerous things. Information that could bring down the entire Blackwood Empire if it ever came to light." Kelly's eyes widened in shock. "Sophia, are you serious?" What kind of information? Sophia shook her head. The less you know right now, the better. But let's just say it involves a lot of illegal activities, fraud, embezzlement, maybe even worse. And you've known about this all this time? Kelly asked, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Why didn't you say anything? Sophia sighed, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. At first, I was scared. I didn't know what to do with the information. And then, well, life happened. Mom got sick, we needed money, and I convinced myself that keeping quiet was the right thing to do. She looked up at her sister, determination blazing in her eyes. But I can't stay silent anymore, Kelly. Not after what happened today. It's time to make things right. Kelly sat down across from her sister, her face pale with worry. But Sophia, if what you're saying is true, these people are dangerous. They have money, power. What chance do we have against them? Sophia reached across the table, taking her sister's hand in her own. We have the truth, Kelly. And sometimes, that's the most powerful weapon of all. As the sisters sat there, the weight of Sophia's revelation hanging between them, neither noticed the black car that had pulled up across the street. Inside, a man in a dark suit spoke quietly into a phone. Sir, we've located the Martinez girl. She's at her apartment with her sister. What are your orders? On the other end of the line, Alexander Blackwood paused, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight with tension. Keep watching them. Don't make a move yet. I need time to think. As he ended the call, Alexander leaned back in his leather chair, his empire suddenly feeling like a house of cards on the verge of collapse. And at the center of it all was Sophia Martinez, the woman he had underestimated, the woman who now held his fate in her hands. In that moment, as the sun climbed higher in the sky over Millbrook, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of power and privilege. Sophia Martinez, the humble waitress with a hidden past, was about to take on one of the most powerful men in the country. And nothing would ever be the same again. As the day wore on, Sophia and Kelly formulated a plan. They knew they couldn't take on the Blackwood Empire alone, they needed allies, people who could help them navigate the treacherous waters ahead. What about your old professor, Dr. Evelyn Carter? Kelly suggested. Didn't you say she had connections in the legal world? Sophia nodded thoughtfully. That's not a bad idea. Dr. Carter always believed in me, even when I had to drop out. And she's not afraid to stand up to powerful people. With renewed purpose, Sophia picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. As it rang, she felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. Would Dr. Carter even remember her? And if she did, would she be willing to help? After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Dr. Evelyn Carter speaking. Sophia took a deep breath. Dr. Carter? It's Sophia. Sophia Martinez. I need your help. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Sophia feared her old mentor had forgotten her. But then Dr. Carter spoke, her voice warm with recognition. Sophia! My goodness, it's been too long. Are you all right? You sound troubled. Sophia felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. I'm in a bit of a situation, Dr. Carter. It's complicated, and, well, it's dangerous. Dr. Carter's voice took on a serious tone. I see. Sophia, why don't you come to my office? We can talk more freely there. Sophia agreed, relief washing over her. As she ended the call, she turned to Kelly. I'm going to meet Dr. Carter. You should stay here and keep an eye on Mom. And Kelly, she added, her voice dropping to a whisper, be careful. Don't open the door for anyone, okay? Kelly nodded, her eyes wide with worry. As Sophia gathered her things, including the precious USB drive, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She peered out the window, her eyes scanning the street below. The black car was gone, but that did little to ease her anxiety. Across town, in the opulent offices of Blackwood Industries, Alexander paced back and forth, his mind racing. The confrontation with Sophia had shaken him more than he cared to admit. He found himself thinking back to that summer 5 years ago, remembering the spark he had felt with the young, idealistic intern. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called, composing himself. His assistant, a severe-looking woman named Victoria, entered the room. Sir, I've compiled the information you requested on Sophia Martinez. Alexander took the file, his eyes scanning the pages quickly. What about her family? Any weaknesses we can exploit? Victoria hesitated for a moment. Well, sir, her mother is ill. Cancer. They've been struggling to pay for treatments. And her younger sister is in danger of losing her scholarship due to financial constraints. Alexander felt a twinge of guilt, quickly suppressed. I see. And what about her movements today? She left her apartment about an hour ago. Our team followed her to Millbrook University. She's currently in a meeting with a Dr. Evelyn Carter in the law department. Alexander's brow furrowed. Carter, why does that name sound familiar? Victoria consulted her notes. Dr. Carter is a prominent legal ethics professor. She's also been involved in several high-profile whistleblower cases over the years. Damn it, Alexander muttered. He turned to Victoria, his voice sharp. I want everything we have on Dr. Carter. And I want to know exactly what Sophia tells her. Use whatever resources necessary. As Victoria left to carry out his orders, Alexander sank into his chair, a growing sense of unease settling over him. He reached for the phone, dialing a number he had hoped never to use again. It's Blackwood, he said when the call connected. We have a situation. I need your special services. Meanwhile, at Millbrook University, Sophia sat across from Dr. Carter in her cozy office, surrounded by towering bookshelves and framed legal documents. The older woman listened intently as Sophia recounted the events of the past few years, culminating in that morning's confrontation at the diner. When Sophia finished, Dr. Carter leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. Sophia, what you're describing, it's not just corporate malfeasance. If what you say is true, we're looking at criminal activity on a massive scale. Sophia nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I know. That's why I came to you. I don't know what to do, Dr. Carter. I want to expose the truth, but I'm scared. These people are powerful, and I have my family to think about. Dr. Carter's eyes softened with compassion. I understand, Sophia. But you've already taken the first step by coming here. Now, we need to move carefully. Do you have any concrete evidence to support your claims? Sophia reached into her bag, pulling out the USB drive. Everything I found during my internship is on here. Financial records, emails, memos, it's all there. Dr. Carter took the drive, her expression thoughtful. This is a good start, but we'll need more. Sophia, I have to ask, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we begin, there's no turning back. The Blackwoods and their associates will come at us with everything they have. Sophia took a deep breath, steeling herself. I'm sure. I've spent years feeling powerless, watching good people suffer while men like Alexander Blackwood profit from their misery. It's time to make things right. Dr. Carter nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That's the Sophia I remember. All right, here's what we're going to do. I have a friend at the FBI, someone I trust implicitly. We'll take this evidence to her, but first, we need to make copies. Lots of copies. As Dr. Carter began outlining their next steps, neither woman noticed the small device hidden behind a potted plant on the bookshelf, a listening device planted by one of Alexander's men just hours earlier. Back at Blackwood Industries, Alexander listened to the conversation with growing alarm. He turned to Victoria, his face pale. "Get me Judge Franklin on the phone. Now." As Victoria hurried to comply, Alexander's mind raced. He had always known this day might come, but he had never expected it to be Sophia, sweet, idealistic Sophia, who would bring his carefully constructed world crashing down. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember the girl he had known 5 years ago. Her laugh, her passion for justice, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams of becoming a doctor. He had ended things with her not just because of their different social standings, as he had claimed, but because he had seen in her a goodness that made him acutely aware of his own moral failings. Now, as he prepared to use every weapon in his considerable arsenal to destroy her, Alexander felt a pang of regret for the man he might have been, the man Sophia had once believed him to be. But there was no time for such sentiments now. He had an empire to protect, and he would do whatever it took to keep it intact. As night fell over Millbrook, Sophia made her way back to her apartment, her mind whirling with everything she had discussed with Dr. Carter. They had made copies of the evidence and arranged to meet with Dr. Carter's FBI contact the following day. For the first time in years, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope. But as she rounded the corner to her street, that hope turned to icy fear. A crowd had gathered outside her building, and she could see the flashing lights of police cars and an ambulance. Her heart pounding, Sophia pushed through the crowd, her eyes scanning frantically for any sign of Kelly or her mother. As she reached the front of the building, she felt a hand on her arm. "Sophia Martinez?" a stern-faced police officer asked. Sophia nodded, barely able to speak. "Yes, that's me. What's happened? Where's my family?" The officer's expression softened slightly. "Ms. Martinez, there's been an incident. Your mother and sister are on their way to the hospital. I'm afraid you'll need to come with us to answer some questions." As the officer led her to a waiting police car, Sophia's mind raced. How could this have happened? Had Alexander already made his move? And if so, how far was he willing to go to keep his secrets? Little did Sophia know that this was just the beginning of a night that would test her resolve, her courage, and her very faith in humanity. As the police car pulled away from the curb, she caught a glimpse of a familiar black sedan parked across the street. Inside, a figure watched her intently, his face hidden in shadow. The game had truly begun, and the stakes were higher than Sophia could have ever imagined. At the hospital, Sophia paced the waiting room, her heart pounding with fear and anxiety. The police had questioned her briefly, asking about her whereabouts and if she had any enemies who might want to harm her family. She had been careful with her answers, not wanting to reveal too much until she could speak with Dr. Carter again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged from the emergency room. "Ms. Martinez?" he called, his face grave. Sophia rushed over, her voice trembling. "Yes, that's me. How are they? My mom and sister, are they okay?" The doctor hesitated for a moment. "Your sister Kelly is stable. She suffered a concussion and some minor cuts and bruises, but she'll recover fully." Sophia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived as she noticed the doctor's continued somber expression. "And my mother?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The doctor's eyes filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Martinez. Your mother's condition was already fragile due to her cancer treatments. The stress of the break-in and fall. I'm afraid she didn't make it. We did everything we could, but her heart couldn't take the strain. Sophia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She stumbled backwards, her vision blurring as tears filled her eyes. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be happening." As she sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling with shock and grief, Sophia felt a presence beside her. She looked up to see Alexander Blackwood standing there, his face a mask of concern. "Sophia," he said softly. "I just heard what happened. I'm so sorry for your loss." For a moment, Sophia could only stare at him, unable to process his presence in the midst of her tragedy. Then, as the reality of the situation crashed over her, a cold fury began to build in her chest. "You," she hissed, rising to her feet. "You did this. This is your fault." Alexander held up his hands, his eyes wide with apparent innocence. "Sophia, please. I know we've had our differences, but I would never. I could never do something like this." Sophia lunged forward, her hands balling into fists. "Liar! You couldn't stand the thought of losing your precious empire, so you decided to teach me a lesson. Well, congratulations, Alexander. You've taken everything from me. Are you happy now?" Security guards rushed over, restraining Sophia as she struggled and screamed. Alexander stepped back, his face a picture of shock and dismay. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," he said quietly. "I truly am." As the guards led Sophia away, Alexander watched her go, his expression unreadable. He pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. "It's done," he said when the call connected. "But things got messy. We may have a problem." Back in her holding room, Sophia sat with her head in her hands, her mind a whirlwind of grief, anger, and fear. She had no proof that Alexander was behind the attack on her family, but in her heart, she knew it was true. The timing was too perfect, the message too clear. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Dr. Carter entering the room, her face lined with worry. "Oh, Sophia," she said, rushing to embrace her former student. "I came as soon as I heard. I'm so sorry." Sophia clung to her mentor, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. "They killed her, Dr. Carter," she sobbed. "My mom, she's gone. And it's all because of me." Dr. Carter pulled back, her hands on Sophia's shoulders. "Listen to me, Sophia. This is not your fault. The people who did this, they're the ones responsible. And we're going to make them pay." Sophia wiped her eyes, looking up at her mentor with a mixture of hope and fear. "How? They've already shown they're willing to kill to keep their secrets. What chance do we have against them?" Dr. Carter's eyes blazed with determination. "We have the truth, Sophia. And we have each other. I've already spoken to my FBI contact. They're launching an investigation as we speak." She reached into her bag, pulling out a file. "I've been doing some digging of my own. There's more to this story than even you know, Sophia. The Blackwood family's corruption goes back generations, and it's intertwined with some of the most powerful people in the country." Sophia leaned forward, her grief momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. "What do you mean?" Dr. Carter opened the file, revealing a complex web of connections and transactions. The Blackwoods aren't just involved in corporate fraud. They're at the center of a massive conspiracy involving politicians, judges, even foreign governments. What you uncovered during your internship was just the tip of the iceberg. As Dr. Carter explained the extent of the Blackwood family's illegal activities, Sophia felt a new sense of purpose growing within her. Her mother's death couldn't be in vain. She would see this through, no matter the cost. "What do we do now?" Sophia asked, her voice steady with resolve. Dr. Carter smiled grimly. "Now, we fight back. But we have to be smart about it. The Blackwoods have eyes and ears everywhere. We need to go underground, gather more evidence, and build a case they can't possibly wriggle out of." She reached into her bag again, pulling out a burner phone and a set of keys. "I have a safe house outside of town. You'll stay there while we work on this. It's not much, but it's secure." Sophia took the items, her mind racing with the implications of what she was about to do. "What about Kelly? I can't just leave her." "I've already arranged for her protection," Dr. Carter assured her. "She'll be moved to a secure location as soon as she's released from the hospital. The FBI will keep her safe." As they finalized their plans, neither woman noticed the small red light blinking on Dr. Carter's phone, a sign that their conversation was being recorded and transmitted to an unknown listener. Miles away, in a dimly lit room, Alexander Blackwood listened to the exchange, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He had never meant for things to go this far. The attack on Sophia's family was supposed to be a warning, a way to scare her into silence. He had never intended for anyone to die. But now, as he listened to Sophia and Dr. Carter plotting against him, Alexander realized that he had set in motion events that he could no longer control. He thought of his own family, his wife, his children, and the legacy he had worked so hard to build. For a moment, he considered coming clean, confessing everything and facing the consequences of his actions. But then he thought of the empire that had been built on generations of secrets and lies. He couldn't be the one to bring it all crashing down. With a heavy heart, Alexander made a decision. He would see this through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he had hoped never to use again. "It's Blackwood," he said when the call connected. "I need you to take care of something for me. 2 targets. Sophia Martinez and Dr. Evelyn Carter. Make it look like an accident." As he ended the call, Alexander poured himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. He looked out the window at the twinkling lights of the city below, a city that had no idea of the storm that was about to break over it. Little did he know that his own world was about to be turned upside down in ways he could never have imagined. Back at the hospital, Sophia said a tearful goodbye to her sister, promising to return for her soon. As she and Dr. Carter made their way to the parking garage, both women were on high alert, acutely aware of the danger they were in. They reached Dr. Carter's car without incident, but as they approached, Sophia noticed something strange. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice low with warning. "Look at the tires." Dr. Carter froze, her eyes widening as she saw the small puncture marks in each of the tires. "They've found us," she whispered. "We need to move. Now." But before they could turn to run, a group of men in dark suits emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. Sophia's heart raced as she recognized one of the men, the driver of the black sedan she had seen outside her apartment. "Ladies," the man said, his voice cold and professional. "I'm afraid you'll need to come with us." Dr. Carter stepped in front of Sophia protectively. "We're not going anywhere with you. We're expected at the FBI office in an hour. If we don't show up, they'll know something's wrong." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid that won't be necessary. We have it on good authority that you won't be making that meeting." As the men moved in closer, Sophia's mind raced, searching for a way out. She thought of her mother, of Kelly, of all the people who had suffered because of the Blackwoods' greed. She couldn't let it end like this. In a split-second decision, Sophia reached into her pocket and pulled out the USB drive. "Looking for this?" she called out, holding it up for all to see. The men's eyes locked onto the small device, momentarily distracted from their approach. Dr. Carter shot Sophia a warning glance, but Sophia pressed on, her heart pounding. This drive contains everything, all the evidence of the Blackwoods' crimes. If anything happens to us, copies will be sent to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. The lead man hesitated, his cold demeanor cracking slightly. Hand it over, Ms. Martinez, and we can all walk away from this. Sophia laughed bitterly. Walk away? Like my mother did? Oh wait, she didn't get to walk away, did she? Her voice cracked with emotion, but she stood her ground. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her voice steady. We're not going anywhere with you, and we're certainly not handing over that drive. Now, I suggest you leave before we call security. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, suddenly, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The men exchanged nervous glances, clearly not expecting this development. This isn't over, the lead man growled, backing away. Watch your backs. As quickly as they had appeared, the men melted back into the shadows of the parking garage. Sophia let out a shaky breath, her legs trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Dr. Carter grabbed her arm, steering her towards the exit. We need to move, now. Those sirens bought us some time, but they won't be fooled for long. As they hurried out of the parking garage, Sophia's mind raced. Dr. Carter, how did you? The older woman smiled grimly. I may have called in a favor with the local police chief. I had a feeling we might need some backup. They emerged onto the street, quickly blending into the evening crowd. Dr. Carter hailed a taxi, giving the driver an address on the outskirts of town. As they sped through the city, Sophia's thoughts turned to her sister. Kelly, she said suddenly. We can't leave her unprotected. Dr. Carter squeezed her hand reassuringly. Don't worry. I've already arranged for her to be moved to a safe location. My FBI contact is personally overseeing her protection. Sophia nodded, feeling a small measure of relief. But as she looked out the window at the passing cityscape, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. Across town, in the opulent offices of Blackwood Industries, Alexander paced back and forth, his face a mask of fury. How could you let them escape? He shouted into his phone. I pay you to handle these situations discreetly. The voice on the other end of the line was apologetic but firm. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but the situation has escalated beyond our control. The FBI is involved now. We can't risk any more direct action. Alexander slammed his fist on the desk. I don't want excuses. I want results. Find them and make sure that drive never sees the light of day. As he ended the call, Alexander sank into his chair, his mind racing. How had it come to this? He thought back to that summer 5 years ago, when he had first met Sophia. She had been so full of life, so passionate about making a difference in the world. For a brief moment, he had allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life, one free from the weight of family expectations and generations of secrets. But in the end, he had chosen the path laid out for him. He had pushed Sophia away, telling himself it was for her own good. And now, here they were, enemies locked in a battle that could destroy them both. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called, composing himself. Victoria entered, her face grave. Sir, there's something you need to see. She handed him a tablet, and Alexander's eyes widened as he saw the breaking news headline, Blackwood Industries under federal investigation, whistleblower alleges massive fraud. How? Alexander breathed, his face pale. How did this get out? Victoria shook her head. We're not sure, sir. But it seems that someone has been feeding information to the press. The story is spreading like wildfire on social media. Alexander stood abruptly, his mind racing. Call an emergency board meeting. And get our PR team on this immediately. We need to control the narrative. As Victoria hurried to comply, Alexander turned to look out the window at the city below. For the first time in his life, he felt truly afraid. The carefully constructed world of the Blackwoods was beginning to crumble, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. Meanwhile, Sophia and Dr. Carter had arrived at a small, nondescript house on the outskirts of town. As they entered, Sophia was surprised to see several people already there, working on computers and sorting through stacks of documents. Dr. Carter smiled at Sophia's confused expression. "Welcome to our command center," she said. "These are some of my most trusted colleagues, lawyers, journalists, and tech experts. We've been working behind the scenes, gathering evidence and building our case." A tall, serious-looking man approached them. "Dr. Carter," he said, nodding in greeting. "And you must be Sophia." "I'm Agent Daniel Thompson, FBI." Sophia shook his hand, still trying to process everything. I don't understand. How long has this been going on?" Dr. Carter led her to a table covered in documents and photographs. "Sophia, what you uncovered during your internship was just the tip of the iceberg. We've been investigating the Blackwoods for years, but we never had enough solid evidence to move against them. Until now." Agent Thompson picked up a file. "Your USB drive was the missing piece we needed. It provided the links between the Blackwoods' illegal activities and several high-ranking government officials. We're talking about a conspiracy that goes back decades." Sophia sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "But why didn't you tell me all this before? Why let me think I was alone in this?" Dr. Carter's eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. We had to maintain absolute secrecy. The Blackwoods have eyes and ears everywhere. If they had any inkling of the full scope of our investigation, they would have buried the evidence so deep we'd never find it." Sophia nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "And my confrontation with Alexander at the diner, that wasn't just a coincidence, was it?" Agent Thompson shook his head. "We knew the Blackwoods were getting nervous. They've been covering their tracks, destroying evidence. We needed something to shake them up, make them careless. Your history with Alexander made you the perfect catalyst." Sophia felt a surge of anger. "So you used me? Put my family in danger?" Dr. Carter reached out, taking Sophia's hand. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt, Sophia. What happened to your mother, it wasn't supposed to go that far. We underestimated how far the Blackwoods would go to protect themselves." Sophia pulled her hand away, standing up. "And now? What happens now?" Agent Thompson's face was grim but determined. "Now, we bring them down. All of them. But we need your help, Sophia. You're the face of this now. The whistleblower who stood up to one of the most powerful families in the country." Sophia paced the room, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to run, to find Kelly and disappear somewhere the Blackwoods could never find them. But another part, the part that remembered her mother's strength, that dreamed of making a difference, knew she couldn't walk away. She turned to face the room, her decision made. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "What do you need me to do?" For the next several hours, Sophia worked with Dr. Carter, Agent Thompson, and the rest of the team, going over every detail of her time at Blackwood Industries. She pored over financial records, identifying key players and connecting the dots between seemingly unrelated transactions. As the night wore on, Sophia found herself thinking of Alexander. Despite everything, she couldn't help but remember the man she had known that summer, the one who had talked about using his family's wealth and influence to make the world a better place. What had happened to that man? How had he become the cold, ruthless figure who could order an attack on an innocent family? Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the front of the house. Agent Thompson rushed in, his face tense. "We've got company," he said. "Multiple vehicles approaching. Looks like private security, heavily armed." Dr. Carter sprang into action. "Initiate Protocol Omega," she called out. The room erupted into controlled chaos as people began shutting down computers and gathering documents. Sophia felt a hand on her arm. It was Agent Thompson. "We need to get you out of here," he said urgently. "You're the key to all of this. If they get their hands on you..." Before he could finish, the sound of breaking glass filled the air, followed by the hiss of gas canisters. "Tear gas," someone shouted. "Everyone out, now." In the confusion, Sophia found herself being hustled towards a back door. As they emerged into the cool night air, she saw several black SUVs pulling up, men in tactical gear pouring out. "This way," Agent Thompson said, leading her towards a waiting car. But before they could reach it, a familiar voice called out, "Sophia!" She turned to see Alexander Blackwood himself striding towards her, flanked by security guards. His face was a mixture of anger and, was that fear? "Sophia, please," he said, his voice softer now. "This has gone too far. Come with me, and we can work this out. I can explain everything." For a moment, Sophia hesitated. Despite everything, a small part of her still wanted to believe in the Alexander she had once known. But then she thought of her mother, of Kelly, of all the lives ruined by the Blackwoods' greed. "There's nothing to explain, Alexander," she said, her voice steady. "It's over. The truth is coming out, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Alexander's face hardened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Sophia. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. If you go through with this, there will be consequences you can't even imagine." Before Sophia could respond, a shot rang out. Alexander stumbled, a look of shock on his face as he clutched his shoulder. More gunfire erupted, and Sophia found herself being pushed into the waiting car by Agent Thompson. As they sped away, Sophia looked back to see the scene descending into chaos. FBI agents were exchanging fire with the Blackwood security forces, while Alexander was being hustled into one of the SUVs. "What's going to happen now?" Sophia asked, her voice shaking. Agent Thompson's face was grim. "Now, we go to ground. The Blackwoods just made their biggest mistake yet. Attacking federal agents? That's the kind of thing that brings down empires." As they drove through the night, Sophia's mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. She thought of Kelly, praying that her sister was safe. She thought of her mother, hoping that somehow, she was watching over them. And she thought of Alexander, the man she had once believed in, now wounded and on the run. Despite everything, she couldn't help but wonder if there was still some good in him, some part of the man she had known that summer, buried beneath years of corruption and family expectations. Little did Sophia know that her path and Alexander's were far from finished crossing. As dawn broke over the city, both of them were hurtling towards a confrontation that would change their lives and the face of American business forever. Meanwhile, in a secure location across town, Kelly Martinez sat in a comfortable but sparse room, her mind reeling from the events of the past few days. An FBI agent had explained the situation to her, but it all seemed like something out of a movie. Her sister, a whistleblower? The Blackwoods, one of the most respected families in the country, involved in a massive conspiracy? A soft knock at the door made her jump. Ms. Martinez, a kind-faced woman said, entering the room. I'm Agent Sarah Chen. I have some news about your sister. Kelly sat up straighter, her heart pounding. Is Sophia okay? What's happening? Agent Chen sat down across from her, her expression serious but not unkind. Your sister is safe, but there's been a development. The safe house where she was staying was attacked. Kelly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Attacked? By who? We believe it was forces working for the Blackwoods, Agent Chen explained. But don't worry. Sophia managed to escape, and she's now in an even more secure location. Kelly nodded, trying to process this information. And what about our mother? Has there been any progress in the investigation of her death? Agent Chen's eyes softened with sympathy. I'm so sorry for your loss, Kelly. We're doing everything we can to get to the bottom of what happened. But right now, our priority is keeping you and your sister safe. As they continued to talk, Kelly couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: fear for her sister's safety, grief for her mother, and a growing anger towards the Blackwoods. She had met Alexander once, at a charity event Sophia had invited her to during her internship. He had seemed so charming, so passionate about using his family's wealth for good. How could that man be the same one responsible for so much pain and suffering? Across town, in a luxurious penthouse apartment, Alexander Blackwood winced as a private doctor tended to his shoulder wound. Victoria hovered nearby, her face a mask of concern and barely concealed panic. Sir, she said hesitantly, the board is demanding answers. The stock price is in freefall, and our major partners are threatening to pull out. What should I tell them? Alexander waved her off with his good arm. Tell them nothing, he growled. Not until we get this situation under control. As the doctor finished bandaging his shoulder, Alexander stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. His empire was crumbling around him, years of careful planning and manipulation unraveling in a matter of days. And at the center of it all was Sophia Martinez, the girl he had underestimated, the one he had pushed away for her own good. Or so he had told himself. For the first time in years, Alexander allowed himself to remember that summer, the long walks in the park, the passionate discussions about changing the world, the way Sophia's eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams of becoming a doctor. He had been a different man then, or at least, he had believed he could be. But then reality had set in. The weight of family expectations, the pressure to maintain the Blackwood legacy at any cost. He had made his choice, pushing Sophia away and fully embracing the dark underbelly of his family's empire. Now, as he looked out at the city he had once thought he controlled, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years: doubt. Was it all worth it? The lies, the corruption, the lives ruined to maintain his family's power and wealth? A sudden commotion from the other room snapped him out of his reverie. Victoria burst in, her face pale. Sir, you need to see this. She handed him a tablet, and Alexander's blood ran cold as he saw the breaking news headline: Blackwood heir Alexander caught on tape admitting to corporate fraud and murder. The article was accompanied by a video, a secret recording from years ago, showing a younger Alexander casually discussing illegal business practices with his father and uncle. But it was the last part of the video that made his heart stop. In it, he could be heard clearly ordering the removal of a whistleblower who had threatened to expose their activities. Alexander stumbled back, sinking into a chair. How? He breathed. How did they get this? Victoria shook her head, her voice trembling. We don't know, sir. But it's everywhere. Every major news outlet, social media. There's no containing this. As the full weight of the situation crashed down on him, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a child: fear. Real, paralyzing fear. The carefully constructed facade of the Blackwood Empire was shattering, and he was at the center of the storm. In that moment, Alexander made a decision that would change the course of everything. He turned to Victoria, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Get me Sophia Martinez," he said. "I need to make this right." Victoria's eyes widened in surprise. "Sir, are you sure that's wise?" "The FBI is." "I don't care about the FBI right now," Alexander cut her off. "This has gone on long enough. It's time to face the consequences of my actions." As Victoria hurried to comply, Alexander walked back to the window, staring out at the city he had once thought he owned. The weight of years of lies and corruption pressed down on him, suffocating in its intensity. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt a glimmer of something he had long thought dead, his conscience. Meanwhile, in a secure FBI safe house on the outskirts of the city, Sophia sat with Agent Thompson and Dr. Carter, watching the news unfold on a small television. The video of Alexander admitting to his crimes played on a loop, interspersed with shots of protesters gathering outside Blackwood Industries headquarters. "I can't believe it," Sophia murmured, her eyes fixed on the screen. "All this time, I thought I was alone in this fight. But there were others, weren't there? Other whistleblowers who tried to come forward?" Dr. Carter nodded solemnly. "Many over the years. Some were bought off, others, well, the Blackwoods have always been ruthless in protecting their interests." Agent Thompson's phone buzzed, and he stepped away to take the call. When he returned, his face was a mixture of disbelief and caution. "That was my superior," he said. "Alexander Blackwood is requesting a meeting. With you, Sophia." Sophia felt her heart skip a beat. "What? Why would he?" "It's a trap," Dr. Carter interjected fiercely. "He's desperate and cornered. We can't trust him." Agent Thompson held up a hand. "Normally, I'd agree. But there's more. Alexander is offering to turn himself in, along with evidence implicating his entire family and their associates. He says he'll only do it if he can speak to Sophia first." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of this offer sank in. Sophia's mind raced, thinking back to the Alexander she had known that summer, the man who had talked about using his family's influence for good. Was it possible that man still existed somewhere beneath the corrupt exterior? "I'll do it," Sophia said suddenly, her voice steady. Dr. Carter started to protest, but Sophia cut her off. "This might be our only chance to bring down the entire network. If Alexander is really willing to cooperate, we need to hear him out." Agent Thompson nodded slowly. "We'll set up a secure meeting. But Sophia, you need to understand the risks. Even with our protection, this is incredibly dangerous." Sophia thought of her mother, of Kelly, of all the lives that had been ruined by the Blackwoods' greed. "I understand," she said. "But I have to try." As the FBI began making arrangements for the meeting, Sophia found herself lost in thought. She remembered the last conversation she had with Alexander before everything fell apart, the pain in his eyes as he told her they could never be together, that their worlds were too different. Now, 5 years later, those worlds had collided in ways neither of them could have imagined. And Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would be a turning point, not just for the case, but for her own journey of healing and justice. Across town, Alexander paced his penthouse, ignoring the pain in his shoulder as he rehearsed what he would say to Sophia. How could he possibly explain the choices he had made? The man he had become? As the hours ticked by, both Sophia and Alexander found themselves on a collision course with destiny. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only determine the fate of the Blackwood Empire but also test the very limits of redemption and forgiveness. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, as if the weather itself was reflecting the gravity of the situation. Sophia sat in the back of an unmarked FBI vehicle, her heart pounding as they approached the neutral location chosen for the meeting, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Agent Thompson turned to her, his expression serious. "Remember, we'll be monitoring everything. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or threatened, just say the word and we'll extract you immediately." Sophia nodded, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. As they pulled up to the warehouse, she caught sight of another vehicle already parked outside, a sleek black sedan that screamed wealth and power. Inside the warehouse, Alexander Blackwood stood alone, his usual entourage of lawyers and security conspicuously absent. He looked different from the last time Sophia had seen him, older, somehow, and wearier. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hunched posture that spoke of a man carrying the weight of his sins. As Sophia entered, flanked by Agent Thompson and another FBI agent, Alexander's eyes locked onto her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air heavy with unspoken words and shared history. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "Sophia," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." Sophia studied him, trying to reconcile the man before her with the arrogant customer who had humiliated her at the diner, and with the charming intern she had known years ago. "I'm here, Alexander. Say what you need to say." Alexander took a deep breath, visibly steeling himself. I don't even know where to begin. I'm sorry seems woefully inadequate for everything that's happened." "You're right," Sophia said, her voice cold. "It is inadequate. My mother is dead, Alexander. My sister and I have been hunted like animals." "And for what? To protect your family's precious empire?" Alexander flinched at her words, the pain evident in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "And there's nothing I can do to change that. But I can try to make things right, starting now." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a flash drive. "This contains everything. Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every cover-up going back 3 generations. Names, dates, account numbers, it's all there." Agent Thompson stepped forward, taking the drive. "Why now, Mr. Blackwood? Why come forward after all this time?" Alexander's eyes never left Sophia's face as he answered. "Because I finally realized the cost of maintaining this facade. The lives ruined, the damage done, and for what? Money? Power? It's not worth it. It never was." He turned to Sophia, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you remember that summer, Sophia? The plans we made, the dreams we shared? I told you then that our worlds were too different, that we could never be together. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of disappointing my family, afraid of losing everything I'd been raised to value." Sophia felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, memories of that long-ago summer flooding back. "I remember," she said softly. "You talked about using your family's influence to make real change in the world." Alexander nodded, a sad smile playing at his lips. "I meant every word. But when the time came to actually do it, to stand up to my father and choose a different path, I failed. I chose the easy way out, embracing the corruption instead of fighting it." He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, Sophia. What I've done, it's unforgivable. But I want you to know that you were right. You were always right. And I'm so sorry it took me this long to see it." Sophia felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger, grief, and a confusing hint of the affection she had once felt for this man. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander straightened, a look of determination replacing the guilt in his eyes. Now, I face the consequences of my actions. I'll testify against my family, against our associates, everyone involved in this web of corruption. It won't bring back your mother or undo the harm that's been done, but it's a start. Agent Thompson cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwood, you understand that by doing this, you're implicating yourself in numerous felonies? You'll be facing significant jail time. Alexander nodded. I understand. And I'm prepared to accept whatever punishment the law deems appropriate. It's time to make things right. As the reality of the situation sank in, Sophia found herself struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to hate Alexander, to never forgive him for the pain he had caused. But another part, the part that remembered the idealistic young man she had known, felt a glimmer of something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. Alexander, she said softly. I can't forgive you. Not now, maybe not ever. But, thank you. For finally doing the right thing. Alexander's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Sophia saw a glimpse of the man she had once known, vulnerable, genuine, free from the weight of his family's expectations. As Agent Thompson began to read Alexander his rights, preparing to take him into custody, a commotion outside caught everyone's attention. The warehouse doors burst open, revealing a team of heavily armed men led by none other than Alexander's father, Richard Blackwood. Alexander! Richard's voice boomed through the space. What the hell do you think you're doing? Alexander stood tall, facing his father with a newfound strength. What I should have done years ago, father. I'm ending this. All of it. Richard's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful little, do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to build this empire? What our family has worked for generations to achieve? An empire built on lies and suffering, Alexander shot back. It ends now. As father and son faced off, the tension in the warehouse reached a boiling point. FBI agents drew their weapons, Richard's men did the same, and Sophia found herself caught in the middle of a standoff that threatened to explode into violence at any moment. In that crucial moment, it was Sophia who stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong. Enough, she shouted. Haven't enough people been hurt already? All eyes turned to her as she continued, her words directed at Richard Blackwood. Your son is trying to do the right thing, to make amends for years of wrongdoing. Are you really willing to add more violence, more suffering, just to protect your precious reputation? Richard faltered, the gun in his hand wavering. For the first time, doubt crept into his expression as he looked from Sophia to his son. Alexander seized the moment, his voice soft but firm. It's over, father. We can't keep living this lie. It's time to face the truth, to accept responsibility for what we've done. The seconds ticked by, the tension in the air palpable. Then, slowly, Richard Blackwood lowered his weapon. His men followed suit, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the warehouse. As the FBI moved in to take Richard and his men into custody, Alexander turned to Sophia one last time. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I promise you, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. Sophia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As she watched Alexander being led away in handcuffs, she felt a strange mix of emotions, closure, relief, and a bittersweet sense of what might have been. In the days and weeks that followed, the full extent of the Blackwood family's crimes came to light. The evidence Alexander provided led to dozens of arrests, implicating corrupt politicians, judges, and business leaders in a web of deceit that spanned decades. Sophia found herself thrust into the spotlight as the whistleblower who had brought down one of the country's most powerful families. It was a role she embraced, using her newfound platform to advocate for stricter corporate oversight and protections for whistleblowers. As for Alexander, he pled guilty to multiple charges, accepting a lengthy prison sentence as part of his plea deal. But true to his word, he cooperated fully with the authorities, his testimony proving instrumental in dismantling the corrupt network his family had built. 1 year after that fateful confrontation in the warehouse, Sophia stood outside the courthouse, having just finished testifying in yet another trial stemming from the Blackwood investigation. As she descended the steps, a familiar face caught her eye. Kelly stood at the bottom of the stairs, a proud smile on her face. The sisters embraced, both of them thinking of their mother and how proud she would have been to see this day. "How are you holding up?" Kelly asked as they walked arm in arm down the street. Sophia smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I'm okay," she said. "It's been a long road, but I finally feel like we're making a difference." As they turned the corner, Sophia caught sight of her reflection in a store window. The tired, beaten-down waitress was gone, replaced by a confident, determined woman who had faced her fears and emerged stronger for it. She thought of Alexander, wondering if he had found any measure of peace in accepting responsibility for his actions. Part of her still struggled with forgiveness, but she had come to realize that holding on to anger would only hold her back. As the sisters made their way to a small cafe, the very one where Sophia now worked as she pursued her dream of becoming a doctor, she felt a sense of hope for the future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. Sophia Martinez, once ridiculed by her wealthy customer, had indeed left him speechless. But more than that, she had found her voice, speaking truth to power and inspiring others to do the same. As she and Kelly settled into their usual booth, Sophia caught sight of a newspaper headline, "Blackwood Whistleblower Testifies in Landmark Corporate Fraud Case." She smiled, thinking of how far she had come and the difference she was making. "You know," Kelly said, following her sister's gaze, "Mom would be so proud of you." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were tears of pride and determination, not sorrow. "She'd be proud of both of us," she replied, squeezing Kelly's hand. As they ordered their usual coffees, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a struggling waitress to a voice for change, she had discovered a strength within herself she never knew existed. The cafe bustled around them, filled with the chatter of everyday life. But for Sophia, it was a reminder of the world she was fighting to improve, a world where honesty and integrity triumphed over greed and corruption. As she sipped her coffee, Sophia made a silent promise to herself and to her mother's memory. She would continue to speak out, to fight for justice, and to inspire others to do the same. The Blackwood saga might be coming to an end, but Sophia Martinez's story was far from over. In the coming years, Sophia would go on to finish her medical degree, combining her newfound passion for advocacy with her original dream of helping others. She established a foundation in her mother's name, providing support for whistleblowers and their families. Kelly, inspired by her sister's courage, pursued a career in law, specializing in corporate accountability. Together, the Martinez sisters became a formidable force for change, their story serving as an inspiration to those who dared to stand up against injustice. And what of Alexander Blackwood? He served his sentence, using his time in prison to reflect on his choices and the man he wanted to be. Upon his release, he dedicated himself to reforming corporate culture, working alongside advocacy groups to promote ethical business practices. Though Sophia and Alexander's paths would cross again in the years to come, their relationship would never be what it once was. But there was a mutual respect, an understanding of the journey they had both undertaken. As for the Blackwood empire, it crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. But from its ashes rose a new generation of business leaders, inspired by Sophia's story to prioritize ethics and social responsibility over pure profit. The tale of the waitress who brought down a corporate giant became legend, a modern David and Goliath story that reminded people of the power of one voice to change the world. And so, on a warm summer evening much like the one where our story began, Sophia stood before a crowd of eager young faces at a university auditorium. She had been invited to speak about her experiences, to inspire the next generation of changemakers. As she looked out at the sea of attentive faces, Sophia felt a surge of hope for the future. She began her speech with the words that had started her on this incredible journey. 5 years ago, I was a waitress in a small diner, ridiculed by a wealthy customer who thought he was above the law. Today, I stand before you as living proof that one person, no matter how seemingly insignificant, can make a difference in the world. The audience hung on her every word as Sophia recounted her story, the highs, the lows, the moments of doubt and triumph. She spoke of the price of integrity, the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it seems the whole world is against you. The path of a whistleblower is never easy, she continued, her voice strong and clear. You will face obstacles, threats, and moments when giving up seems like the only option. But I'm here to tell you that the truth is worth fighting for. Your voice matters. Your courage matters. As she concluded her speech, a thunderous applause filled the auditorium. Students rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes, inspired by Sophia's journey from a humble waitress to a catalyst for change. After the presentation, as Sophia was gathering her things, a young woman approached her, eyes shining with determination. Ms. Martinez, the student said, her voice trembling slightly. Your story, it's given me the courage to come forward about some irregularities I've noticed at my internship. I was afraid before, but now I know it's the right thing to do. Sophia smiled warmly, placing a hand on the young woman's shoulder. Remember, you're not alone. There are resources and people who will support you. And know that by speaking up, you're not just protecting yourself, but potentially many others who might be affected. As she left the auditorium that evening, Sophia felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. She had turned her pain into purpose, her struggle into strength. The journey had been difficult, marked by loss and hardship, but it had led her to this moment where she could use her experience to light the way for others. Driving home, Sophia's thoughts drifted to her mother. She imagined her watching from somewhere beyond, proud of the woman her daughter had become. The ache of her loss was still there, a dull throb in Sophia's heart, but it was now accompanied by a fierce determination to honor her memory by continuing to fight for justice. As she pulled up to her modest but comfortable home, Sophia saw Kelly waiting on the porch, a wide smile on her face. The sisters embraced, no words needed to express the bond they shared, forged in adversity and strengthened by their shared commitment to making the world a better place. Inside, as they settled in for their weekly dinner together, Kelly raised her glass in a toast. To Mom, she said softly. And to never staying silent in the face of injustice. Sophia clinked her glass against her sister's, adding, and to the power of an ordinary person to do extraordinary things. As night fell over the city, Sophia Martinez, once a ridiculed waitress, now a beacon of hope and courage, looked out at the twinkling lights with a sense of peace. She had faced her wealthy customer, left him speechless with the truth, and in doing so, had found her own voice, a voice that would continue to resonate, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and fight for what's right. The story of Sophia Martinez, the waitress who brought down a corporate giant, would be told for years to come. But for Sophia, it wasn't about the recognition or the accolades. It was about staying true to herself, honoring her mother's memory, and proving that in the face of overwhelming odds, one person's courage can indeed change the world. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Sophia's last thoughts were of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the strength she had found within herself, and for the opportunity to make a difference, one voice at a time. And so, our tale of triumph over adversity, of light overcoming darkness, comes to a close. But in many ways, it's just the beginning. For every Sophia Martinez out there, there's a chance for change, a chance for justice, a chance for a better world. All it takes is the courage to stand up, speak out, and never, ever underestimate the power of a single voice in the face of injustice.